Hey everyone, it's June, your host. Welcome back. So today I want to talk with you about something that's been popping up a lot lately in the news, in comments, and honestly in a lot of worry conversations I've been having with people in my own life. It's this idea of a $2,000 stimulus-style payment tied to tariffs, sometimes called a tariff refund or a tariff rebate that President Donald Trump has been talking about, able to issue at least a $2,000 dividend and also pay down debt for the country. But we do a $2,000 dividend to the people of our country would probably set a limit of, income limit, where it made sense, but we will be able to make a very substantial dividend to the people of our country. I believe we can do that without Congress. I know right away that raises a lot of questions. Is it real? Who would get it? Where would the money come from? And most importantly, should you actually expect this money to show up in your bank account? Because for a lot of people right now, even the possibility of $2,000 feels meaningful. Groceries are still expensive, rent is still high, and yeah, a little extra breathing room matters. Understanding what's really going on here can help you plan and, just as importantly, help you avoid getting your hopes up in the wrong way. Before we go any further, though, let me ask you something real quick. When you hear about a possible stimulus-style check, what's the first thing that comes to mind for you? Relief? Skepticism? Confusion? Or maybe just frustration? Let me know in the comments. I really do read them, and they help shape these conversations. So, let's talk about where this whole idea comes from. President Trump has been arguing that tariffs, which are basically taxes placed on imported goods, are bringing in so much money that the government could afford to send some of it back to Americans directly. He's used phrases like dividend and refund, and the number that keeps coming up is $2,000 per person. The basic message is tariffs are generating revenue, and Americans should see some of that money come back to them in the form of check. Now, on the surface, that sounds pretty straightforward and honestly appealing. You pay higher prices because of tariffs, and then later you get a check that helps offset that cost. And guess what? That framing is not accidental. It's designed to connect with something very real that people are feeling right now, which is that prices went up fast and they never really came back down. So the promise of a refund feels like fairness, like balance being restored. But here's where things start to get more complicated. And this is the part one want to slow down on because it really matters. First, let's talk about the money itself. Tariffs do bring in revenue. That part is true. Last year, tariff collections were around $195 billion, and projections this year are higher, maybe $300 to $350 billion. That sounds like a lot of money, and it is. But when you zoom out, a universal $2,000 payment to Americans would cost somewhere around $600 billion. And that's just for one round. So even in a strong tariff, the math doesn't quite line up. The government would be paying out far more than it brings in from tariffs alone. And if this were to become something recurring like an annual payment, the cost over time could run into the trillions. That's where budget experts really start to push back because the federal government is already dealing with large deficits, and adding another massive spending program without a clear funding source raises red flags. Another thing to consider is who actually pays tariffs in the first place. There's a lot of debate about this, and it gets misunderstood all the time. While tariffs are technically charged on foreign goods, most economists agree that the cost is largely passed on to consumers here in the United States through higher prices. In fact, some estimates suggest that the average U.S. household is paying a little over $2,000 more per year because of tariffs. And yeah, that number should sound familiar. So in that sense, critics argue that this proposed check isn't really free money or a bonus. It's more like a partial refund of money families already paid at the store. You paid more for appliances, clothes, food, and other goods, and then later you might get a check that roughly matches that increase. That doesn't mean it wouldn't help, but it does change how you think about it. Now, let's talk about timing, because this is another area where things get fuzzy. President Trump has given different timelines at different points. At one point, he suggested checks could arrive in the middle of the year. Later, he shifted that to toward the end of the year, And in some interviews, when pressed for details, he seemed less certain, even questioning whether he had made firm promises at all. Now, that kind of shifting timeline is important to notice, not because it means bad intent, but because it tells us this idea is still very fluid. There's no finalized plan, no official program, no application process, no eligibility rules. Right now, it's a proposal, not a policy. And that brings us to one of the biggest obstacles, which is Congress. The president has suggested at times that congressional approval might not be necessary, but legal experts are pretty clear on this point. Only Congress has the authority to authorize spending and issue direct payments like this. That's not a gray area. It's written directly into how our government works. Even people within the administration have acknowledged this reality. Any check like this would almost certainly require legislation, and that means debate, negotiation, and potentially significant changes to the original idea. We've already seen related proposals stall. A previous bill for smaller payments didn't make it out of committee, and another proposal focused on tax deductions instead of checks altogether. So, even if the idea has support in principle, turning it into an actual payment is a long road. On top of all that, there's a major legal issue hanging over the entire tariff system itself. Some of the tariffs funding this proposal are being challenged in court. The Supreme Court has not yet issued a final ruling. And until it does, there's uncertainty about whether these tariffs will remain in place. If they're struck down, the government could owe massive refunds to companies that paid them. And now here's where it gets interesting and a little frustrating. Even if companies do get refunds, that doesn't mean consumers see immediate relief. Businesses may use that money first to cover past losses or stabilize operations. Price reductions at the store, if they happen at all, could take a long time. So, the idea that tariff refunds automatically translate into lower prices or fast consumer checks just isn't how it works in practice. This uncertainty shows up in prediction markets too. When people are asked to bet on whether these payments will actually happen, the odds are relatively low, especially in the near term. That doesn't mean it's impossible, but it does suggest skepticism from people who follow policy closely. Now, I want to pause here and say something important. None of this means the idea is meaningless or that people are wrong to care about it. The reason this conversation exists at all is because financial pressure is real. People are stretched, savings are down, fixed incomes haven't kept up with costs. So when leaders talk about direct payments, it resonates. Supporters of the administration argue that tariffs are part of a bigger strategy to protect domestic industries and strengthen trade negotiations. From that perspective, the rebate discussion is about sharing the benefits of that strategy with the public. Critics, on the other hand, see it more as messaging than a concrete plan. Something that sounds good, but may never fully materialize. And honestly, both perspectives can exist at the same time. You can acknowledge the intent while still being realistic about the hurdles. So, what does this mean for you, practically speaking? First, I wouldn't plan your budget around receiving this money. There is no official check, no timeline, and no guarantee. If it happens, great. That's a bonus. But relying on it could put you in a tough spot. Second, this is a good reminder to focus on what you can control. If prices are higher because of tariffs or inflation more broadly, small adjustments matter. Tracking expenses, comparing prices, and building even a modest emergency fund can provide more stability than waiting on a policy outcome that may or may not arrive. And third, stay informed, but try not to let every headline drive your emotions. Economic policy takes time, and it often looks very different at the end than it did in the early talking stages. As we keep watching how this unfolds, I'll continue to update you with what's actually changing, not just what's being said, because clarity matters, especially when money is involved. The big takeaway here is that the $2,000 tariff refund check is an idea with real political momentum, but also real legal and financial barriers. It speaks to real economic stress, but it's far from guaranteed.